Hi, it's Chef Cooke again here at G4 Guitar in Butler, Western Australia. And today, welcome to part 3 of Songwriting from Scales. So first we're going to do a quick recap of a few things from the first 2 videos, and then we're going to go straight on to writing melodies using the scale. So we began with the C major scale. We use the C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C notes of that scale, and on those notes we constructed a chord for every note. So for instance, on the first chord, or the first note, we constructed the chord of C by taking the first note of the scale, the third note of the scale, and the fifth note of the scale. A 3-note chord like that is called a triad, from which we get our standard chords like C, D minor, E minor, F, G, and so on. Now the important thing there is, for instance, what we did with the C chord. We use the first, the third, and the fifth. If we take the first, the third, and the fifth, and then the octave, let's have a look at those closer. First, third, fifth, and octave, we get the chord tones of C major. Okay, those would be the notes that we use in an arpeggio. Okay, we can use those chord tones in making a melody from the scale. This is quite important. We'll keep coming back to the chord tones, because there are going to be 3 rules, 3 really important rules for making a melody from the scale. Now these rules can be broken. Nearly all of the musical rules can be broken, so perhaps they're not rules, they're more like guidelines, but still they are going to be quite useful if you're exploring how to make a melody out of a scale. So rule number 1 is, in every musical phrase, it's better to end on a chord note or a chord tone. Right? Now what do I mean by a musical phrase? A phrase is kind of like a sentence. It's not the whole paragraph or the whole conversation, but it is one little sentence. We usually play a phrase and then pause, much like a singer does. There are no continuous streams of notes in singing. There are always pauses. For one thing, we need to breathe. So we may do a phrase which is, and then the last note of that, the G note, would be our chord tone, hopefully, if we've got this right. And it is. If you look at the chord tones, then that G would be the last one. Okay, so this is rule number 1. Why is this important? Well, you'll actually find that if you don't end on chord tones, it may not fit so well with the chord. So if I do that little phrase again, let me sing that over the top. Let's go, la da 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 da. So we actually played a G note, the 5th of the scale, and that fits quite nicely over a C chord. If, for instance, we played the 2nd note of the scale, which is a D, over that chord, da, as you can tell, it doesn't seem to quite fit da, over that chord very well. And that's because it's not a chord tone. Okay, so that's rule number 1. I'll reiterate that one again. That's end each phrase that you use musically on a chord tone. Okay, here's rule number 2. In every one of those phrases, it is a good idea to use at least one note that is not a chord tone. So we can use many chord tones in a phrase, but if we don't use a note that is not a chord tone, what's going to happen is we're going to end up playing an arpeggio, because if we play only chord tones, C scale, like that, we're going to end up with that arpeggio. Now that's great because that's musical, but it's not really a melody. A melody is what the singer would do in a song. Not always, but very often what the singer would do in a song. It's the main theme of a song, the melody. It's what actually carries the tune. So the third rule that we're going to use is keep the notes close together. Okay, what exactly does that mean? Now, some people think that going is keeping the notes close together. If we look at the scale diagram, it kind of looks like that's what we're doing. We're bouncing about between these two notes. But actually we're jumping because the next note up from the C is going to be the D. And then the E, and then the F, which is the note that we just played. If we go from here to here, we've actually jumped a fourth. Okay, an interval of a fourth. So that's the first note to the fourth note. That tends not to sound very melodic. That's not to say we can't do it, but when we jump from one note to another, which is not next to each other in the scale, what we should do is immediately follow that with more notes that do keep close together. So if we did da, 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 we're actually jumping from the first to the fourth, but then coming back down in consecutive notes. So that's another idea to keep in mind. Before we construct the melody, what we need to do is construct a chord sequence or a chord progression. Now I'm going to pick one in a minor scale this time, which means that first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the A minor scale. A minor is easier than the other minor scales because, like C, as we've discovered in the previous video, number 2, it has no sharps or flats, so there's no sharps or flats to worry about. So we're going to go down, starting on the A note, and we're going to build up the A minor scale. We're going to go A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. From there we're going to add another octave just to make this more interesting. So from A we're going to go to B, C, D, E, F, G and A again. Okay, that's 2 octaves of A minor. That gives us plenty of notes to play with for our melody. Now I'm not going to suggest that you need to use all of those notes in a melody. In fact, I'm going to suggest that it's probably better if you keep it simple, especially to begin with. Simple melodies are more memorable. The more complexly you make it, the more chance there is that you will find it difficult to follow or difficult to remember. We want simple and memorable things to make a good melody. Okay, so here's my chord progression. I'm going to go with an A minor to start, the 1 chord. And then we're going to go to a C, which is the 3 chord. And we're going to go to the 7 chord, which is a G, and then a 4 chord. Now you might remember from the previous video that the 4 chord is a primary chord. The 1, the 4 and the 5 are all primary. So the 4 will lead nicely back into the 1 again. Here's our chord progression. We're going to do 4 beats on each chord just to make things simple for the time being. But obviously, as we've explained before, you can do any number of beats on different rhythms and so forth. Okay, here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. let's go to the board and have a look how we're going to write a progression over that. Okay, I'm going to give you a real simple example here now. Right, we're going to start at the beginning of the scale, just to make matters easy. So that would be the A note, which is the open note on the 5th string. Open, 2, 3. Open, 2. That gives us A, B, C, D, E. Now I'm going to call that a phrase. One of the reasons why I'm going to call that a phrase is because E is one of the chord tones. It's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th note of the scale, as we can see there. All right, now what I'm doing here is I'm putting one note on every single beat. Normally in melody, you wouldn't really do that. You can, there's no law against it, but we'd probably make it more interesting. But just to see how this works, this is what we're going to do. So, on beat 1, on beat 2, on beat 3, on beat 4, and then beat 5, notes 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, we call that the end of a phrase. That means we're going to have a pause of some kind, otherwise it's not a phrase. It's just going to be a longer phrase then, if we continue. So, now that we got to this point, we've got to decide how long we're going to pause for before we do the next phrase. Okay, one way to do that is to sing it or play it and kind of imagine how long you want to wait before you start again. It's down to taste, this, of course. But I would probably do something like this. We've got la da 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 la. Okay, so you see what I did there? I actually counted out the 2, 3, and 4, those beats on the second bar, and then started again. So therefore, this note is going to last for the whole of the rest of this bar. It actually becomes a whole note, if you remember your notes. These are of course quarter notes because there's one on every beat, then a whole note, then we're going to carry on. Just to make things a little bit easier, I'm going to carry straight on up the scale from the point where we left off. So the next note is going to be on the 3rd fret, open, 2, open, 1, ending on a C note. What we want to do as well, of course, is look at the chords that we got. Now we started with A minor. So that's going to fit over the A minor chord. The next chord was C. That one note is going to sit over C. The next chord was G. So all of that is going to fit over G, and then the final note, the C note, is going to fit over the D minor. Let's have a look at how that works. So here's our chord progression again. The A minor, the C, the G, and the D minor. And here's how the melody sounds over the top of that. La da 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 da. Da 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 da. Da 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 da. Da 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 da. Okay, so we can see that that kind of fits really. We'll also notice that, as we said before, the 2 was an E, which is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5th note of the scale, which is a chord tone. And then the end of the second phrase, which comes here, was a C note. And you'll actually find that that is the 3rd note, or the 3rd of A minor. So if we go from an A note, 1, 2, 3, or even this A note, 1, 2, 3. Different octaves, but they're both C. So basically that works out quite well. Let's look at a slightly more complicated melody. Not necessarily more complicated, but more rhythmically interesting melody that doesn't just go up the scale with pauses. Yeah, because that's basically what we've done here. We've done a scale with a break in it. That's not really too melodic, but it does work. So let's have a look at a different version. Okay, so we said that our number one rule was that we should use a chord tone at the end of our phrase. But we've looked at the chord tones of A minor, of the A minor scale and the A minor chord, which are the same thing. What happens on the other chords? Well, actually, we can use the chord tones from the other chords. Now, you could go and look at the scales of C and the scales of G and the scales of D minor and work out your chord tones from that. That you can do definitely, but it's a little bit more long-winded and takes a bit more theory. But what you can do instead is just look at the chords. Let's have a look now. So if we look at the chord of C, and we have actually already worked this out when we did the scale of C, but let's look at it again. The easiest way to figure out what chord tones we can use are actually looking at the chord itself. Any of those notes that you play within the chord are necessarily going to be chord tones. The same thing applies to G. So you can use any one of those notes as a chord tone when you're playing over this chord. D minor, any of those four notes will do as a chord tone. This is worth bearing in mind because this will affect how you use your melody. Now obviously you don't want to be jumping about, so don't jump from a high A to a low G suddenly, not unless that's the effect you're after. We want to keep the notes fairly close together, as we said in rule 3. Okay, so let's have a look at a little melody that I've made up now. And we're going to break this up so it's not quite one note per beat anymore. We're going to have a couple of notes on a beat every now and again. But it's still keeping a fairly simple melody. Let's have a look at that. We're going to start on an A. We're going to start on beat 1, just to make things simple. Right. But then I'm going to play another A, and then a B, like that. What I'm actually doing there is I'm playing on beat 4 and the and beat, or the in-between beat. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. We can of course put ands in between every one of these if we want to. Just so we know where our count is. So it's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then a 1 there. Now that 1 is a C note. And what chord am I playing over? C. Well, this is the simplest chord tone that I can possibly go for over a C. And that's going to fit. Yeah. Now, interestingly, you might think that that's a phrase and this is a phrase, but this is kind of an extended phrase really. One note doesn't really make a phrase. And that note continues until this note starts. So that is our phrase there. Right. I'm going to continue this and we'll play it in a moment so that you can actually hear what's going on. Right. It's a fairly simple melody. This is how it's going to sound. 1, 2, 3, 4. Right, so obviously the A note, this one here, is over the A minor. A again, followed by B and then C. Now B is not a chord tone, but that's okay because we're using a non-chord tone to get to the end of our phrase, which is a C over a C chord. Then we play ending on this note. If you know your strings, you'll note that that's an open G note over a G chord. So once again, we've used the basic root note to go over the chord. So that's got to fit. And then we've got over a D minor. Now that's not a D, that is actually an F. But if you look at your D minor chord, you will see that note, the F note, on the top of the chord. So now we've got a melody that goes like this. La, la, da, 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 da. I think you can agree that works quite well. The fact of breaking up the rhythm a little bit with the phrases here, that does help to make it more melodic. And you can see how that works. It may take some experimentation to get to that stage where you can do that a little bit better than what we had before, which was one note on every beat. But I think you'll agree it is more interesting rhythmically. And you'll notice how I have little themes, like the 4 and 1, the 4 and 1, 4 and 1 each time. It's not a problem to repeat things in melodies. It's actually usually a good thing. The more repetitive the melody is, the more easily it's assimilated by the listener. That is, they take it in and they recognize it fairly quickly. It becomes a memorable melody. If you think about any memorable tune, it's usually quite simple as far as the melody goes. All right, I hope that helps. Thanks very much.